deserve someone who can give you the life you want, Sarah," Dr. Marcus Coleman announced to the stunned silence of our private dining room at the Sterling Club. His words cut through the celebration like a scalpel through flesh, as our closest friends and family froze mid-toast. He reached across the mahogany table, not for my hand, but for Dr. Elena Vasquez's perfectly manicured fingers. "Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I've been struggling with how to tell you this, but hiding it any longer would be cruel to everyone involved," he continued, his voice carrying that same practiced bedside manner he used with difficult patients. I watched his face closely, the rehearsed compassion in his dark eyes, the carefully modulated tone designed to appear reluctant yet decisive. Around us, the private dining room seemed to contract, the warm amber lighting suddenly feeling harsh and exposing. My mother's wine glass trembled in her hand. My brother Jake's jaw tightened as he set down his fork with deliberate control. But I remained perfectly calm, taking a measured sip of my champagne. "Actually, Marcus," I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins, "your timing couldn't be more perfect." I reached into my designer clutch and withdrew a leather portfolio, sliding it across the white linen tablecloth toward him, with the same precision he used in surgery. "Happy birthday, darling." His brow furrowed in confusion as he opened the portfolio. I watched the exact moment realization dawned, his face draining of color, eyes widening in disbelief as he processed the documents before him. The controlling partnership acquisition papers for Coleman Family Medicine, his practice. Now my practice. "What? What is this?" he whispered, his voice suddenly hoarse. "It's quite simple, really," I replied, lifting my glass in a mock toast. "While you were busy planning your future with Elena, I was busy securing mine. I never intended to become the kind of woman who would orchestrate a hostile takeover of her husband's medical practice. The Sarah Mitchell who graduated summa cum laude from Northwestern's business school 15 years ago was ambitious, yes, but also believed deeply in partnership, in building something meaningful with someone who valued loyalty as much as success. That Sarah met Dr. Marcus Coleman at a healthcare innovation conference in Chicago. He was everything I thought I wanted: brilliant, charismatic, and passionately dedicated to transforming primary care in underserved communities. As a fresh MBA working for Meridian Healthcare Consulting, I was tasked with evaluating emerging medical practices for potential investment partnerships. Marcus was presenting his vision for Coleman Family Medicine, a community-focused practice that would revolutionize patient care through innovative technology and genuine human connection. Our conversation began as professional networking, but evolved into something deeper when we discovered we shared not just career ambitions, but core values about making healthcare accessible and compassionate. By the end of that weekend conference, we'd exchanged personal numbers instead of business cards. For 5 years, we built our relationship alongside our careers, with the same methodical precision Marcus applied to complex diagnoses. I watched with genuine pride as his small clinic in suburban Milwaukee grew from a modest 2-doctor practice operating out of a converted strip mall to the most respected family medicine group in the greater Milwaukee area. Coleman Family Medicine expanded to 4 locations, employed 12 physicians, and served over 15,000 patients. I celebrated each milestone as if it were my own achievement. When he secured his first major insurance contract, I was the one who suggested the celebration dinner. When he was featured on the cover of Midwest Medical Business as Young Physician of the Year, I framed the magazine and hung it in our kitchen. When the practice needed a new medical director, I spent countless evenings helping him prepare for board presentations and strategic planning sessions. Meanwhile, my own career flourished at Meridian Healthcare Consulting. I became the youngest senior partner in the firm's history, specializing in healthcare practice valuations and merger acquisitions. My expertise in the medical business landscape made me invaluable to clients navigating the increasingly complex world of healthcare economics. We were Milwaukee's healthcare power couple, ambitious, successful, and seemingly building toward a shared vision of professional and personal fulfillment. When Marcus proposed during a long weekend at his family's cabin in northern Wisconsin, overlooking the pristine waters of Lake Superior, I didn't hesitate. We were married 8 months later in a ceremony at the Milwaukee Art Museum, surrounded by 200 guests, including colleagues, patients, and family members, who had watched our relationship evolve from professional admiration to deep partnership. The photos from that day show us radiant with possibility. Marcus in his perfectly tailored tuxedo, me in a custom gown that cost more than most people's cars, both of us drunk on love, and the certainty that we were building something extraordinary together. If someone had shown me a glimpse of the future then, of me sitting in my home office at 3 a.m, methodically planning the acquisition of my husband's medical practice as retribution for his betrayal, I would have suggested they seek immediate psychiatric evaluation. But life has a way of rewriting even the most carefully crafted stories. The first 5 years of our marriage maintained the momentum and mutual support that had characterized our courtship. We purchased our dream home, a restored 1920s colonial in Wauwatosa, with enough space for the children we planned to have once the practice reached a certain revenue threshold. We traveled extensively, combining medical conferences with romantic getaways to places like Tuscany and New Zealand. We discussed starting a family with the same strategic approach we applied to everything else, viewing parenthood as another beautiful chapter to be planned and executed when the timing was optimal. Looking back now, I recognize that Marcus's approach to our relationship, treating it like another business plan with benchmarks and performance metrics, should have concerned me. But I understood ambition. I respected the dedication required to build a thriving medical practice in an increasingly difficult healthcare environment. Besides, our life felt abundant and purposeful. I believed we had all the time in the world to transition from building our careers to building our family. The subtle shift began in our 6th year of marriage when Marcus decided to expand Coleman Family Medicine's psychiatric services. He brought in Dr. Elena Vasquez, a psychiatrist with impressive credentials from Johns Hopkins and a track record of building successful mental health programs. She was undeniably qualified, board-certified in both psychiatry and addiction medicine, with published research on integrated care models that had been featured in several prestigious medical journals. She was also undeniably attractive, with the kind of effortless elegance that made every room feel like her personal stage. Elena had a gift for making every person she spoke with feel like the most fascinating individual she'd ever encountered, a skill that served her well in psychiatric practice, but created ripple effects beyond her professional sphere. Initially, I wasn't concerned. I had never been the jealous type, and our marriage felt unshakable after years of shared goals and mutual support. Elena's addition to the practice made strategic sense. Mental health services were becoming increasingly important in primary care, and her expertise would differentiate Coleman Family Medicine from competitors in a crowded market. But small changes began accumulating like sediment in what had once been crystal clear water. Marcus started working later than usual, scheduling evening consultations and weekend strategy sessions to integrate psychiatric services into the practice's existing framework. His phone, which had once been an open book between us, developed a persistent face-down position when we were together at home. "The new HIPAA protocols are incredibly strict," he explained when I casually mentioned the change during breakfast one morning. "We're implementing additional security measures across all devices that access patient information." I nodded, accepting the explanation even as a small voice in the back of my mind noted that his increased attention to privacy had coincided perfectly with Elena's arrival at the practice. That voice grew more insistent during the practice's annual holiday party when I observed Elena's hand lingering on Marcus's arm as they discussed patient integration strategies, and the way his eyes unconsciously tracked her movements across the room. Still, I said nothing. Instead, I watched and analyzed, gathering information with the same methodical approach I used for complex healthcare consulting projects. The late nights at the office became more frequent. The weekend medical conferences that had once included me now seemed to require only core medical staff, always including Elena. The intimate dinners and spontaneous weekend getaways that had once punctuated our routine became casualties of Marcus's increasingly demanding schedule. Our conversations, once rich with shared dreams and mutual support, devolved into logistics about household management and calendar coordination. We moved around each other like polite strangers, maintaining the external appearance of a successful marriage, while the emotional infrastructure quietly eroded. "Is everything all right?" I asked one evening as we prepared for bed, going through the careful choreography of two people sharing space without truly connecting. "Just exhausted from the expansion," Marcus replied without meeting my eyes. Integrating psychiatric services is more complex than I anticipated. Elena and I are working through some challenging implementation issues. I could have pressed harder then. Perhaps I should have, but something held me back. Pride, perhaps, or the increasingly undeniable suspicion that I wouldn't appreciate the answers to my questions. The rational part of my mind, the part that had built a successful consulting career by facing difficult truths, was at war with the part of me that still wanted to believe in the partnership we'd spent years constructing. The foundation of that partnership, I was beginning to understand, might have been less solid than I'd believed, but the full extent of its deterioration wouldn't become clear until one rainy evening in March, when I returned home early from a client meeting and discovered just how thoroughly my life had been rebuilt without my knowledge or consent. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The confirmation came on a gray Tuesday evening in March, when I left my client meeting with Aurora Health System earlier than anticipated. A sudden migraine had forced me to cut short what should have been a 3-hour strategic planning session. As I pulled into our circular driveway in Wauwatosa, I noticed Elena's distinctive silver BMW parked discreetly behind the large oak tree that bordered our property, positioned just out of sight from the main road, but unmistakably hers. For several minutes I sat in my own car with the engine off, rain drumming steadily against the windshield. The rational part of my mind offered innocent explanations. Perhaps Marcus was conducting a house call consultation, or they were reviewing sensitive patient files that required privacy. But my instincts, honed by years of evaluating healthcare businesses for hidden liabilities, were screaming that something was fundamentally wrong. I could have driven away, pretended I hadn't seen the car, maintained the comfortable fiction that my marriage was merely going through a difficult professional transition. But denial had never been part of my toolkit. I'd built my consulting career on confronting uncomfortable realities head-on, and I wasn't about to start avoiding them in my personal life. The house was quiet when I entered through the kitchen, but there were telltale signs of recent activity. 2 wine glasses on the granite countertop, still containing remnants of the 2018 Burgundy we'd been saving for our anniversary. A women's cardigan draped over the back of a bar stool, definitely not mine, in a shade of emerald that Elena favored. The faint scent of her distinctive perfume lingering in the air. I moved through our home with deliberate silence, each step carrying me closer to a truth I intellectually understood but emotionally wasn't prepared to confront. When I reached the hallway leading to Marcus's home office, I heard Elena's laugh, the same professional musical sound I'd heard at countless medical conferences, but softer now, intimate in a way that made my stomach clench. Then Marcus's voice, low and affectionate, saying something I couldn't quite distinguish, followed by a silence that spoke volumes. "Alan?" I didn't need to see more. The evidence was circumstantial but overwhelming, like a diagnostic workup that pointed to an obvious conclusion, even before the definitive test results arrived. Instead of confronting them, I retreated as quietly as I'd entered, got back in my car, and drove directly to my best friend Catherine's townhouse in Bayview. Catherine Rodriguez had been my college roommate at Northwestern, and remained my closest confidant through every major life transition. She took one look at my face and immediately poured 2 generous glasses of wine without asking questions. "How long have you suspected?" she asked after I'd explained the evening's discovery in the clinical terms I might use to describe a failing healthcare merger. "Months," I admitted, surprised by the relief of finally speaking the truth aloud. "But there's a difference between suspecting and knowing. What are you going to do?" I stared into my wine glass, watching the deep red liquid catch the light from Catherine's kitchen pendant lamps. "I honestly don't know yet," but that wasn't entirely accurate. Already, the analytical part of my brain was engaging, assessing options and calculating potential outcomes, not just for my marriage, but for the complex financial entanglement that 9 years with Marcus had created. Coleman Family Medicine wasn't just his professional legacy. It was an asset I'd helped build through countless hours of strategic advice, business planning, and emotional support. More than that, it was a business I understood better than Marcus realized. The next morning, I called Rebecca Chen, the most respected divorce attorney in Milwaukee. That same afternoon, I reached out to David Morrison, my former mentor at Meridian Healthcare Consulting, and one of the most experienced healthcare business valuators in the Midwest. "I need some advice, David," I said after explaining the situation in the same detached terms I might use to discuss a troubled client engagement rather than my disintegrating marriage. Coleman Family Medicine is approaching a significant expansion phase. Marcus currently holds majority ownership through his founding partnership structure. Theoretically, what would it take for an outside investor to acquire controlling interest in the practice? David's silence on the other end of the line spoke volumes. When he finally responded, his voice carried the measured caution of someone who'd navigated healthcare business disputes for 30 years. "That would be an extremely unconventional move, Sarah. Some might call it vindictive. I'd call it strategic," I countered. Coleman Family Medicine has always been undervalued in the current market. With proper management restructuring and capital investment, it could be worth double its current valuation within 2 years. The practice has been operating below its potential for years. "And the fact that it's your husband's practice?" "Soon-to-be ex-husband's practice," I corrected. "And yes, that's a factor, but not the determining one. This is about recognizing a sound business opportunity disguised as a personal situation." After another long pause, David sighed audibly. "I'll make some inquiries, but Sarah, be absolutely certain this is the path you want to take. Revenge might provide temporary satisfaction, but it rarely leads to long-term peace." I thanked him and ended the call, already mentally preparing my next moves. What David didn't understand was that this wasn't primarily about revenge, though I'd be lying if I claimed that wasn't a factor. This was about reclaiming agency in a situation where I'd been systematically deceived and marginalized. It was about refusing to be the loyal wife who stood by supportively while her husband built a new life with someone else. For the next 8 weeks, I lived a carefully orchestrated double life that would have impressed any method actor. At home, I maintained our routine with Oscar-worthy precision. I asked about Marcus's day with apparent interest, nodded sympathetically when he complained about insurance company bureaucracy or staffing challenges. I didn't confront him about Elena. I didn't hint at my knowledge of their affair. Instead, I became the consummate supportive spouse, playing my role flawlessly while systematically preparing to dismantle the professional life we'd built together. With Rebecca, I mapped out a divorce strategy designed to protect my assets and maximize my negotiating position. Wisconsin's community property laws would work in my favor, but Marcus's medical practice ownership structure was complex enough to require careful analysis. With David, I developed an acquisition strategy for Coleman Family Medicine that focused on the practice's 3 minority partners, physicians who had joined the practice during its expansion phase and held smaller equity stakes. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, who ran the pediatric division, had been quietly expressing concerns about the practice's strategic direction for months. Dr. Robert Kim, the urgent care specialist, was approaching retirement and had mentioned interest in liquidating his ownership stake. Dr. Amanda Foster, who headed the women's health program, was considering relocating to California to be closer to her aging parents. The pieces of my plan fell into place with surprising efficiency. Perhaps it was simply that I'd finally unleashed the full force of my analytical capabilities, unburdened by the emotional constraints that had previously limited my thinking. Or perhaps the universe was compensating for my personal devastation by smoothing my professional path. Dr. Walsh's concerns about practice management proved well-founded when I discreetly reviewed the financial records I had legitimate access to as Marcus's spouse. The practice was profitable but operating inefficiently, with several cost centers that could be optimized and revenue streams that remained underdeveloped. Elena's psychiatric division, while strategically sound, was burning through capital faster than projected due to implementation challenges that Marcus was too proud to acknowledge. Dr. Kim's retirement timeline accelerated when his wife received a cancer diagnosis that made their financial security a higher priority than long-term equity appreciation. Dr. Foster's family situation in California became more pressing when her father suffered a stroke, making her partnership stake feel like an impediment to the major life change she needed to make. By early May, I had secured preliminary agreements for minority stake acquisitions that would give me approximately 31% ownership in Coleman Family Medicine, combined with the 8% ownership stake Marcus had transferred to me during our 5th wedding anniversary. Because we're building this together, he'd said at the time, I was approaching the threshold needed for significant influence, if not outright control. The final piece of my puzzle came from an unexpected source. Dr. Patricia Hoffman, Marcus's original partner and the practice's co-founder. Patricia had known Marcus since their residency days at Medical College of Wisconsin and had been instrumental in establishing Coleman Family Medicine's community reputation and patient base. She requested a private meeting at a quiet coffee shop in Brookfield, well away from the medical community's gossip networks. I know what you're doing, she said without preamble after we'd settled into a corner booth with our lattes. And I know why. I maintained a neutral expression, uncertain how much Patricia actually knew versus suspected. Marcus isn't the same person who started this practice, she continued, her voice heavy with disappointment. The vision we had, accessible, compassionate healthcare for working families, has been compromised by his ego and poor judgment. The Elena situation is just the most visible symptom of deeper problems. Her words hit harder than I'd expected. Patricia's validation of my concerns about Marcus's character and professional judgment provided confirmation I hadn't realized I needed. Why are you telling me this? I asked carefully. Patricia slid a manila folder across the small table. My partnership stake. 22%. I've been planning to retire anyway, but not if it means leaving the practice in Marcus's hands when he's making increasingly reckless decisions about both business strategy and personal conduct. I stared at the folder, understanding the magnitude of what Patricia was offering. With her shares, I wouldn't just have influence. I would have unequivocal control of Coleman Family Medicine. Why me? I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. Because you understand what we built here, she replied. Because you've been advising Marcus on practice management for years, usually with better judgment than he's shown lately. And because despite everything that's happened, I believe you still care about what this practice means to our patients and our community. She stood, leaving a $20 bill on the table for our untouched drinks. Just promise me one thing. When you take control, focus on saving the practice, not on punishing Marcus. Coleman Family Medicine deserves better than becoming collateral damage in your divorce. With Patricia's shares, I had the leverage I needed. Rebecca finalized our divorce strategy while I worked with David to structure the acquisition through a healthcare investment vehicle that would initially mask my identity as the controlling party. The timing was critical. I needed the ownership transfer to complete before Marcus realized what was happening, but after I had documented evidence of his infidelity to strengthen my divorce position. The opportunity to bring everything together presented itself in the form of Marcus's 40th birthday. Despite the growing distance between us, he still expected me to organize his annual celebration, a tradition I'd maintained for 9 years. This year, he specifically requested a private dinner at the Sterling Club, with our closest friends and key medical colleagues. I have some important announcements to make, he told me, that familiar gleam of self-satisfaction in his eyes. It's time for some significant changes in our lives. I agreed to handle all the arrangements, knowing with absolute certainty what those changes would entail. Marcus wasn't just planning to leave me. He was planning to humiliate me by announcing his decision publicly, on his birthday, in front of everyone who mattered in our shared professional and social circles. It was a classic Marcus power play, controlling the narrative while appearing reluctant and honest, positioning himself as the truthful spouse who simply couldn't continue living a lie. What he didn't know was that I'd received final confirmation of the practice acquisition that very morning. As of 10 a.m., I effectively controlled 61% of Coleman Family Medicine through a combination of direct partnerships and proxy agreements. The legal documentation was being processed even as Marcus asked me to plan the dinner that would serve as the stage for my public dismissal. I booked the private dining room at the Sterling Club, selected Marcus's favorite wines, and chose a menu featuring all his preferred dishes. I invited his parents, my family, our closest friends, and key members of Coleman Family Medicine's leadership team. I wore the navy blue dress he'd always complimented, styled my hair the way he preferred, and arrived early to ensure every detail was perfect. And then I waited. outwardly serene but inwardly coiled like a spring, for the moment when my husband would attempt to destroy me publicly, unaware that I had already reclaimed my power and was about to reveal exactly who controlled the professional legacy he thought was his alone. The evening of Marcus's 40th birthday dinner unfolded with the precision of a carefully choreographed surgical procedure. I arrived at the Sterling Club 90 minutes early, ostensibly to oversee final preparations, but actually to center myself for what would become the most pivotal moment of my adult life. The Sterling Club's private dining room exuded old-world elegance, with its mahogany paneling, crystal chandeliers, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake Michigan. I'd chosen this venue deliberately. Neutral territory where Marcus felt comfortable and confident, surrounded by the trappings of success he'd worked so hard to achieve. It would make his downfall all the more dramatic. As guests began arriving, I played my role flawlessly. I embraced Marcus's parents, Dr. Richard and Helen Coleman, who had flown in from Phoenix for the celebration. I made small talk with our neighbors, the Andersons, who had become close friends over the years. I welcomed colleagues from Coleman Family Medicine with the same warm hospitality I'd shown at countless previous gatherings. Elena arrived precisely on time, stunning in a black cocktail dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. She greeted me with air kisses and what appeared to be genuine warmth, though I caught the slight tension around her eyes that suggested she wasn't as comfortable with deception as she pretended to be. "Sarah, you look absolutely radiant," she said, her psychiatric training evident in how carefully she studied my face for signs of suspicion or distress. "Marcus is so lucky to have you organizing these beautiful celebrations." "Thank you, Elena," I replied with practiced sincerity. "I've always believed that milestone birthdays deserve special recognition. After all, turning 40 is a time for reflection on everything you've built and everything you hope to achieve." The irony in my words was lost on her, but I savored it privately. Marcus made his entrance 20 minutes later, resplendent in the custom navy suit I'd given him for Christmas. He worked the room with the natural charisma that had first attracted me, moving from group to group with practiced ease, accepting birthday wishes, and engaging in the kind of professional small talk that had become second nature to him. I watched him closely throughout the cocktail hour, noting how his eyes kept finding Elena across the room, how his smile became more genuine when she laughed at something Dr. Walsh said, how he positioned himself to be near her without making it obvious to casual observers. To anyone else, it might have looked like polite professional interaction. To me, having spent weeks analyzing every micro-expression and behavioral pattern, it was confirmation of everything I already knew. Dinner conversation flowed easily around topics familiar to our social circle: the challenges of healthcare reform, vacation plans for the upcoming summer, recommendations for restaurants and cultural events around Milwaukee. My brother Jake, a criminal defense attorney with excellent instincts for reading people and situations, occasionally shot questioning glances in my direction. He'd always been protective of me, and I could see him picking up on subtle undercurrents that others missed. My mother, Beverly Mitchell, regaled the table with stories from her recent art history tour of Italy, while Marcus's father shared updates on his golf handicap and retirement adventures in Arizona. The conversation was comfortable and familiar, exactly the kind of evening Marcus would want to remember as his last happy family gathering before everything changed. As the main course was being cleared away, I caught the eye of our server and nodded slightly. This was the prearranged signal that Marcus was about to make his announcement, and I wanted to ensure we wouldn't be interrupted by staff clearing plates or refilling wine glasses. Marcus stood slowly, his chair scraping softly against the hardwood floor. The sound drew immediate attention from around the table, conversations trailing off as all eyes turned toward the birthday celebrant. He reached for his wine glass, raising it slightly in a gesture that suggested an important toast was forthcoming. "First, I want to thank everyone for being here tonight," he began, his voice carrying the confident tone he used when addressing medical conferences or board meetings. "Turning 40 feels like a natural moment for reflection, for examining your life honestly and asking whether you're living authentically." I felt my pulse quicken despite knowing exactly what was coming. This was it, the moment Marcus would attempt to publicly dismantle our marriage, while positioning himself as the reluctant truth-teller forced into honesty by circumstances beyond his control. "The truth is," Marcus continued, pausing to make eye contact with several people around the table, "I haven't been living authentically for quite some time now. The room grew noticeably quieter, the comfortable dinner party atmosphere shifting into something more tense and uncertain. Dr. Hoffman, seated to my left, reached almost unconsciously for her water glass. Jake's expression hardened as he sensed the direction this was heading. "Sarah and I have built something wonderful together," Marcus said, his gaze settling on me with what appeared to be genuine regret. "She's brilliant, supportive, everything any man could want in a partner. But sometimes, life takes us in directions we never anticipated." Here it comes, I thought, my hand steady as I reached for the leather portfolio I'd placed discreetly beside my chair earlier in the evening. "The heart wants what it wants," Marcus continued, his voice taking on the philosophical tone he used when delivering difficult diagnoses to patients. "And pretending otherwise would be unfair to everyone involved." That's when he reached for Elena's hand, intertwining their fingers on top of the white linen tablecloth, in a gesture that was both intimate and deliberate. Several guests gasped audibly. My mother's fork clattered onto her plate. Jake's knuckles whitened as his hands clenched into fists. "You deserve better than me, Sarah," Marcus announced, his words carrying across the suddenly silent room. "I've been trying to find the right time to tell you this, but there's never a perfect moment for these things." The practiced sincerity in his voice, the carefully rehearsed apologetic expression, the way he managed to make himself appear both vulnerable and decisive. It was a masterful performance. If I hadn't known better, I might have been impressed by his ability to present betrayal as thoughtful honesty. "Actually, Marcus," I said, my voice cutting through the tension with surprising steadiness, "your timing couldn't be more perfect." I lifted the leather portfolio from beside my chair and slid it across the table toward him, with the same deliberate precision he used when signing prescriptions. "Happy birthday, darling." His brow furrowed in confusion as he released Elena's hand to open the portfolio. I watched his face carefully, cataloging every micro-expression as understanding dawned. The confident smile faded first, replaced by puzzlement, then growing concern, and finally complete shock as he processed the documents before him. Partnership acquisition agreements, ownership transfer documentation, legal filings establishing new controlling interest in Coleman Family Medicine, his medical practice. Now my medical practice. "What is this?" he whispered, his voice suddenly hoarse, all pretense of control evaporating. "It's quite simple, really," I replied, lifting my champagne glass and a mock toast while maintaining perfect composure despite the adrenaline flooding my system. "While you were busy building a future with Elena, I was busy securing mine." I smiled, and for the first time in months it reached my eyes. "You're absolutely right about one thing, though. I do deserve better." Elena pulled her hand away from Marcus's as if she'd been burned, staring at the documents with growing horror. "Marcus, what is she talking about?" Dr. Hoffman, who had remained silent throughout Marcus's announcement, couldn't suppress a slight smile. "I believe Sarah is saying she now controls Coleman Family Medicine." "That's impossible," Marcus snapped, frantically flipping through the pages with increasing agitation. "I founded this practice. I own majority control." "You did," I corrected gently, savoring every word. "Until quite recently. Check the signatures, Marcus. It's all perfectly legal and properly executed." His eyes darted across the documents, recognition flashing as he saw familiar names among the sellers. "Patricia? How could you?" "Quite easily, actually," Dr. Hoffman replied, her voice calm and professional. "About as easily as you betrayed your wife and compromised the practice's professional integrity." Marcus turned back to me, shock giving way to anger as the full implications of his situation became clear. "This is insane, Sarah. You can't run a medical practice. You don't have clinical training or—" "I don't need clinical training to manage the business operations," I interrupted smoothly. "I'm a healthcare consultant, Marcus. Evaluating and optimizing medical practices is literally what I do for a living. Did you think I was just playing supportive wife all these years when I offered strategic advice?" The silence that followed was deafening. I could see our guests processing what they were witnessing. Not just the revelation of Marcus's affair, but the complete reversal of power happening before their eyes. This wasn't just a marriage ending. It was a corporate takeover executed with surgical precision. My mother broke the tension with a short, astonished laugh. "Well," she said, reaching for her wine glass. "This is certainly more memorable than last year's birthday dinner." Jake raised his glass to me, pride evident in his expression despite the shock. "To my sister, always thinking 3 steps ahead." "This isn't over," Marcus stated, though his voice lacked conviction as the reality of his new circumstances began to sink in. "Actually, it is," I replied, standing gracefully and gathering my clutch. "The divorce papers will be delivered to your office tomorrow morning. Don't worry, they're quite fair." "I have no interest in destroying you personally, Marcus. As of today, I'm far more interested in running your practice than ruining your life." I glanced at Elena, who seemed to be shrinking into her chair as she realized the full scope of what had just unfolded. "Though I should mention there will be some immediate changes to the medical staff, I'm sure you understand the necessity." I looked around the table at our guests, at the shock, admiration, and confusion painted across their faces. I apologize for the dramatics. It wasn't my intention to disrupt the evening this way, but as Marcus said, sometimes life takes us in unexpected directions. With that, I walked out of the private dining room, my head held high and my legs surprisingly steady considering the magnitude of what had just occurred. In the club's elegant foyer, I paused for a moment, suddenly aware that I was standing at the threshold of an entirely new chapter of my life, one I hadn't planned for, but one that held unexpected promise and possibility. Outside, the cool spring air felt refreshing against my flushed skin. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of months of careful planning and emotional suppression lifting from my shoulders. My phone buzzed with a text from Catherine. "How did it go?" I smiled as I typed back, "I own a medical practice now. Drinks tomorrow?" Then I slipped my phone back into my clutch and hailed a taxi, not to the Wauwatosa house I'd never spend another night in, but to the downtown hotel suite I'd reserved earlier that day for exactly this moment. Tomorrow there would be logistics to manage, questions to answer, a medical practice to run. But tonight I would savor this moment of perfect clarity, this unexpected freedom that had emerged from betrayal and been transformed into empowerment. The morning after Marcus's birthday dinner, I awoke in my hotel suite at the Intercontinental Milwaukee to a phone that had been buzzing incessantly since dawn. 37 missed calls, 64 text messages, and an inbox flooded with emails from family members, friends, colleagues, and local media outlets who had somehow caught wind of the dramatic events at the Sterling Club. I ignored them all until I'd showered, ordered room service, and savored a perfectly brewed cup of coffee while watching the sunrise over Lake Michigan. Only then did I begin the process of managing the aftermath of my calculated revelation. My first call was to Rebecca Chen, confirming that the divorce papers would be hand-delivered to Marcus's office within the hour. My second was to David Morrison, thanking him for his strategic guidance and discussing the press release we'd need to craft about Coleman Family Medicine's change in ownership structure. My third was to Catherine, who answered on the first ring with barely contained excitement. "You absolute legend," she said without preamble. Jake texted me at midnight with a blow-by-blow account of the dinner. "The entire Milwaukee medical community is going to be talking about this for decades." "That wasn't the intention," I replied, though I couldn't deny feeling a surge of satisfaction at the thought of Marcus having to face his colleagues after such a public humiliation. "What's next, CEO?" Catherine asked, using the title with obvious relish. The question gave me pause. I'd been so focused on the acquisition strategy and the perfect moment of revelation that I hadn't fully processed the day-to-day reality of what would follow. I was now the majority owner and de facto chief executive of a multi-million-dollar medical practice, with 4 locations, dozens of employees, and thousands of patients depending on consistent, high-quality care. "I need to meet with the medical staff," I said, thinking aloud. "Reassure the employees, review the financial projections in detail, and establish clear operational protocols. And I need to find a permanent place to live." "Start with the last one," Catherine advised. "You need a headquarters for your new life as a healthcare mogul." She was right. I couldn't continue living in hotel suites indefinitely, and returning to the Wauwatosa house was emotionally impossible. By noon, I'd arranged viewings of 3 downtown condominiums, sophisticated spaces that would position me closer to Coleman Family Medicine's main office, while providing the psychological distance I needed from my former life. Before heading out, I drafted a practice-wide email to all Coleman Family Medicine employees, informing them of the ownership transition and assuring them that patient care and their job security remained my highest priorities. I emphasized my commitment to the practice's founding mission while announcing an all-hands meeting for the following day, where I would address questions and outline my vision for the practice's future. The response was immediate and more positive than I'd dared hope. Several nurses and administrative staff sent private replies expressing support, and it became clear that Marcus's management style had created more friction than I'd realized. Apparently, his increasing focus on expansion and revenue generation had come at the expense of the collaborative culture that had originally defined Coleman Family Medicine. As I was leaving the hotel, my phone rang with a call from Helen Coleman, Marcus's mother. I hesitated before answering, uncertain what to expect from the woman who had welcomed me into her family 9 years ago. "Sarah," she began, her voice tight with emotion, "I don't know what to say about last night." "There's nothing to say, Helen," I replied carefully. "I'm sorry you and Richard had to witness that. It wasn't how I wanted your visit to Milwaukee to unfold." "No," she said firmly, surprising me with her tone. "I'm the one who should apologize. For what Marcus did to you, for what he's become. Richard and I raised him better than this." Her words touched me unexpectedly. In all my strategic planning, I'd given little thought to how Marcus's parents would process the public dissolution of our marriage, alongside their son's professional downfall. "This isn't your fault," I assured her. "Marcus made his own choices." "As did you," Helen replied, and I could hear something like admiration entering her voice. "It was quite something what you did last night. I don't know whether to be shocked or impressed." I found myself laughing despite the emotional weight of the conversation. "I'm still figuring that out myself." "Well," Helen continued after a moment, "whatever happens next, I want you to know that Richard and I still consider you family. That doesn't change because Marcus couldn't honor his commitments." The conversation left me oddly unsettled as I toured potential apartments throughout the afternoon. I'd expected clean breaks and clear divisions between my old life and new, but reality was proving more nuanced. Some relationships would survive the dramatic transition, others would become casualties, and many would require careful navigation of new boundaries and expectations. I selected a sleek penthouse in the historic Third Ward, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Milwaukee River, signing the lease immediately, and arranging for an interior designer to furnish it within the week. The space felt like a fresh start. Modern, sophisticated, and completely divorced from the aesthetic Marcus and I had shared. By late afternoon, I was ready to face Coleman Family Medicine directly. The practice occupied 2 floors of a modern medical building in Wauwatosa, a space I'd visited countless times for various social and business functions, but would now enter as the owner and chief executive. The receptionist, Maria Santos, did a visible double-take as I approached the front desk. "Mrs. Coleman?" she greeted me, confusion evident in her voice. "I didn't know you had an appointment today." "I don't have an appointment," I replied, "but I think we need to talk. Could you please ask Dr. Hoffman to meet me in the main conference room?" Within minutes, Patricia appeared in the lobby, relief visible on her face when she saw me. "You came," she said simply. "Good. The rumor mill has been working overtime since news of last night started spreading." "I imagine it has," I replied. "Is Marcus here?" Patricia shook her head. "He called in sick this morning. First time in 15 years. Elena didn't show up either. Apparently she submitted her resignation via email at 3 a.m. Interesting. I'd expected Elena to exit quickly once the scope of her professional miscalculation became clear, but Marcus's absence suggested he was struggling more than I'd anticipated with his new reality. "What about the rest of the staff?" I asked as Patricia led me through the familiar hallways lined with diplomas, patient education materials, and the kind of inspirational artwork that had become standard in medical offices. "Mixed reactions," she replied honestly. "Some are concerned about job security, others are curious about what changes you'll implement. Most are in wait-and-see mode, but there's definitely an undercurrent of excitement." Marcus's leadership style had become increasingly difficult. We settled into the main conference room, where Patricia pulled out a thick folder containing what appeared to be comprehensive practice analytics. "I've been preparing this for weeks," she said, spreading financial reports, patient satisfaction surveys, and operational assessments across the mahogany table. "If you're going to run Coleman Family Medicine effectively, you need to understand exactly what you've acquired." For the next 2 hours, Patricia walked me through every aspect of the practice's operations, with the thoroughness of a medical resident presenting a complex case. The financial picture was better than I'd expected. The practice was profitable and growing, but there were clear inefficiencies in resource allocation and missed opportunities for revenue optimization. More concerning were the staff dynamics Patricia revealed. Marcus's increasing preoccupation with Elena and practice expansion had created communication gaps between the administrative and clinical teams. Several long-term employees had been considering departures due to feeling undervalued and excluded from decision-making processes. "The good news," Patricia concluded, "is that the foundation is solid. The patient base is loyal, the clinical outcomes are excellent, and the reputation in the community remains strong. But the practice needs consistent leadership with a clear vision for sustainable growth." "And you think I can provide that?" I asked, genuinely seeking her assessment. Patricia smiled for the first time since I'd arrived. "Sarah, you've been providing strategic guidance for this practice for years, usually with better judgment than Marcus showed. The only difference now is that you'll have the authority to implement your recommendations." As if summoned by our conversation, my phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "We need to talk. Can you meet me at the house tonight?" I showed the message to Patricia, who raised an eyebrow. "Are you ready for that conversation?" "I suppose I have to be," I replied, though the prospect of returning to our shared home for what would likely be a difficult confrontation filled me with dread. "Want some advice?" Patricia offered. "Don't go alone. Bring Rebecca or Catherine. This conversation needs witnesses, and you need moral support." Her suggestion was wise. I texted Rebecca, who agreed to accompany me, then responded to Marcus. 7 p.m. My attorney will be present." His reply came immediately. "That's not necessary, Sarah. This is personal." "Nothing is personal anymore, Marcus," I typed back. "Everything is business now." That evening, Rebecca and I arrived at the Wauwatosa house precisely at 7. The circular driveway that had once felt welcoming now seemed imposing. The Tudor-style architecture that Marcus and I had fallen in love with now appeared like a beautiful relic from someone else's life. Marcus opened the door before we could ring the bell, looking haggard in a way I'd never seen before. His usually impeccable appearance was disheveled, wrinkled shirt, unshaven face, hair that suggested he'd been running his hands through it repeatedly. "Rebecca," he nodded politely to my attorney, then turned to me with eyes that held a mixture of desperation and something that might have been genuine regret. "Thank you for coming, Sarah. I know this is difficult." "What do you want, Marcus?" I asked, stepping into the foyer but going no further into the house that had once been our sanctuary. "I want to understand," he said, his voice lacking the confidence that had characterized every previous conversation we'd had. "How did you do it? How did you acquire controlling interest without me knowing?" Rebecca stepped forward slightly, a subtle reminder of her protective presence. "Dr. Coleman, before we proceed, I should inform you that anything said tonight may be relevant to the divorce proceedings." Marcus waved dismissively. "I'm not trying to renegotiate anything. I just need to understand how thoroughly I misunderstood the woman I was married to." "You didn't misunderstand me," I replied. "You stopped paying attention. There's a difference." For the next hour, Marcus asked questions about my acquisition strategy, with the same methodical approach he used to diagnose complex medical conditions. How had I identified the minority partner's willingness to sell? When had I first suspected his affair? What had motivated Patricia to support my takeover? I answered honestly, partly because Rebecca was there to ensure nothing I said would compromise my legal position, but mostly because I found myself curious about Marcus's perspective on his own downfall. "I never meant for it to happen," he said finally, referring to the affair with Elena. "It just evolved. One consultation became dinner. Dinner became something more personal." "And you never considered ending our marriage before starting something with her?" I asked. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "I should have," he admitted. "I should have been honest with you about feeling disconnected from our relationship. Instead, I took the coward's way out. It was the most self-aware statement I'd heard from him in years, possibly ever. Why the public announcement, I asked. Why humiliate me in front of our friends and family? I thought it would be easier, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Less painful than a private conversation where you could argue or try to save what I'd already decided was over. I thought controlling the narrative would somehow make it less cruel. Instead, it made it more cruel, Rebecca observed dryly. And it gave Sarah the perfect opportunity to reveal how thoroughly you'd underestimated her. Marcus looked at me with something approaching awe. You planned this perfectly, didn't you? The timing, the documentation, even the venue. You knew exactly what I was going to do, and you were ready. I had to be, I replied simply. You gave me no choice. As we prepared to leave, Marcus made one final request. The practice, he said. I know I have no right to ask, but Coleman Family Medicine has been my life's work. Promise me you won't destroy what we built together. I considered his words carefully. Despite everything that had happened between us personally, the practice represented something larger than our failed marriage. It was a healthcare resource for thousands of patients, a livelihood for dozens of employees, and a legacy that had genuine value beyond our personal drama. I won't destroy it, I assured him. I'm going to make it better than it ever was under your leadership. And as Rebecca and I drove away from the house for what I knew would be the last time, I realized that promise wasn't just to Marcus. It was to myself, to the patients who trusted Coleman Family Medicine, and to the future I was determined to build from the ashes of my old life. The all-hands meeting at Coleman Family Medicine took place in the main conference room at 8 a.m. sharp, exactly 72 hours after the birthday dinner that had changed everything. I arrived 30 minutes early, wearing a charcoal gray suit that projected authority without being intimidating, and found the room already buzzing with nervous energy as employees filtered in. 63 people in total: physicians, nurse practitioners, registered nurses, medical assistants, administrative staff, and support personnel who kept the practice running smoothly across 4 locations. Some faces were familiar from holiday parties and practice events over the years, others were newer additions I'd only heard Marcus mention in passing. All of them were looking at me with expressions ranging from curiosity to concern to barely concealed excitement. Dr. Patricia Hoffman opened the meeting with a brief introduction that established my credentials and relationship to the practice, though most employees already knew me as Dr. Coleman's wife. Today, that identity needed to evolve into something entirely different. Many of you have known me in a social capacity, I began, standing at the head of the conference table where Marcus had presided over countless staff meetings. Today I'm speaking to you as the majority owner and chief executive of Coleman Family Medicine. This transition may seem sudden, but I want to assure you that it comes after careful consideration of what's best for our patients, our staff, and the practice's future. I outlined my immediate priorities: operational stability, enhanced communication between clinical and administrative teams, and a renewed focus on the patient-centered care that had originally defined Coleman Family Medicine's mission. I addressed concerns about job security directly, announcing that no positions would be eliminated during the transition period, and that compensation reviews would be conducted to ensure competitive wages across all roles. Change can be unsettling, I acknowledged, but it also creates opportunities. I'm not here to dismantle what works. I'm here to build on Coleman Family Medicine's strengths, while addressing areas where we've fallen short of our potential. The questions that followed revealed more about the practice's internal dynamics than I'd learned in years of casual observation. Jennifer Walsh, the pediatric division head, asked about plans for expanding children's mental health services, apparently a patient need that had been identified but never pursued due to resource constraints. Robert Kim inquired about telemedicine capabilities, noting that many elderly patients struggled with transportation to appointments. Amanda Foster raised concerns about staff burnout and the need for better work-life balance policies. Each question demonstrated that the clinical staff had been thinking strategically about practice improvements, but had lacked a leadership structure that valued their input. Marcus's increasingly autocratic management style had stifled the collaborative culture that had once made Coleman Family Medicine a desirable workplace. These are exactly the kinds of innovations we should be pursuing. I responded to each suggestion. Over the next month, I'll be meeting with department heads individually to develop comprehensive improvement plans. I want your ideas, your concerns, and your expertise driving our strategic decisions. Maria Santos, the front desk coordinator, raised her hand tentatively. Will Dr. Coleman be continuing with the practice? The room fell silent, everyone aware that this was the question underlying all others. Marcus's absence from the meeting had been noted but not officially addressed. Dr. Coleman has decided to pursue other opportunities, I replied diplomatically. He'll be transitioning out of his role over the next 60 days to ensure continuity of care for his patients. We're already identifying qualified physicians to maintain our patient capacity. After the meeting concluded, Patricia lingered behind as staff members filed out, many stopping to express cautious optimism about the changes ahead. That went better than I expected, she observed. You struck the right balance between acknowledging uncertainty and projecting confidence. Now comes the harder part, I replied, gathering my notes. Actually implementing improvements while learning to run a medical practice. The next 6 weeks passed in a blur of 18-hour days, crash courses in healthcare administration, and the kind of intensive learning curve I hadn't experienced since my MBA program. I divided my time between the practice's 4 locations, sitting in on patient consultations to understand workflow patterns, reviewing financial statements with our accounting firm, and meeting with department heads to develop the improvement plans I'd promised. The challenges were more complex than I'd anticipated. Healthcare administration involved navigating labyrinthine insurance regulations, maintaining compliance with constantly evolving federal requirements, and managing the delicate balance between patient care quality and financial sustainability. Unlike the healthcare consulting work I'd done for years, which focused on analyzing problems from the outside, running a practice meant living with the consequences of every decision. But there were unexpected rewards as well. When we implemented the telemedicine program Dr. Kim had suggested, I watched elderly patients light up as they received quality care from the comfort of their homes. When we hired a child psychologist to work with Dr. Walsh's pediatric team, parents expressed tearful gratitude for finally having access to integrated mental health services for their children. Most satisfying was observing the staff's renewed enthusiasm as they saw their suggestions being taken seriously and implemented quickly. The collaborative culture that had originally attracted talented professionals to Coleman Family Medicine began to resurface, stronger than before because it was now built on genuine mutual respect rather than charismatic leadership. Marcus completed his transition out of the practice with surprising professionalism. He transferred his patient files meticulously, introduced his replacement physicians to long-term patients personally, and even helped develop protocols for maintaining continuity of care. Our interactions during this period were strictly business-focused, but I noticed he seemed almost relieved to be stepping away from the administrative responsibilities that had never truly suited his personality. You were right, he told me during one of our final transition meetings. I'm better at practicing medicine than running a business. I should have recognized that years ago. Elena's departure had been less graceful. Her resignation email cited, quote, philosophical differences with new management direction, but Patricia informed me that she'd left several patient cases inadequately documented and had attempted to recruit 2 other staff members to join her at a competing practice. I decided against pursuing any legal action, preferring to focus on moving forward rather than relitigating past conflicts. 6 weeks after taking control of the practice, I received a call that would test everything I'd been building. Dr. Amanda Foster requested an urgent meeting to discuss a, quote, significant patient safety concern that had come to light during a routine chart review. We met in my office, formerly Marcus's office, though I'd redecorated it completely to eliminate any lingering associations with my former marriage. Amanda looked unusually tense as she spread several patient files across my desk. I've been reviewing Elena's cases as part of the transition, she began, and I've found some troubling patterns in her psychiatric evaluations and medication management. As Amanda walked me through the documentation, a disturbing picture emerged. Elena had been overprescribing controlled substances to several patients, particularly anxiety medications and stimulants. In some cases, she'd bypassed standard protocols for monitoring and follow-up that were designed to prevent addiction and abuse. How many patients are we talking about? I asked, though I dreaded the answer. At least 15 that I've identified so far, Amanda replied. And there may be more as we complete the full chart review. This was exactly the kind of crisis that could destroy a medical practice's reputation and potentially result in regulatory sanctions or legal liability. My first instinct was to panic, but years of consulting experience had taught me that emergencies required systematic analysis rather than emotional reactions. What are our obligations here? I asked Amanda. We need to report this to the state medical board, she said. We also need to contact the affected patients and develop treatment plans to safely transition them off inappropriate medications. And we should probably consult with our malpractice insurance carrier. The next 72 hours tested every leadership skill I'd developed over my career. Working with Amanda and our medical malpractice attorney, we developed a comprehensive response plan that prioritized patient safety while protecting the practice from legal exposure. We contacted each affected patient personally, explaining the situation with transparency and arranging for immediate follow-up care. We reported Elena's prescribing patterns to the state medical board as required by law. We implemented enhanced medication monitoring protocols to prevent similar issues in the future. Most importantly, we turned what could have been a catastrophic scandal into an opportunity to demonstrate our commitment to patient safety and ethical practice. Rather than trying to cover up Elena's mistakes, we used them as a catalyst for implementing industry-leading safeguards and protocols. The local medical community's response was overwhelmingly positive. Instead of viewing us as a practice compromised by unethical behavior, colleagues and patients saw Coleman Family Medicine as an organization willing to confront difficult truths and prioritize patient welfare over reputation management. You handled that perfectly, Patricia told me after we'd completed the patient notifications and regulatory reporting. Marcus would have tried to minimize the situation or find ways to avoid disclosure. You turned a potential disaster into a demonstration of integrity. 3 months after the birthday dinner that had changed my life, I stood in my new penthouse apartment, looking out over the Milwaukee River as the sun set behind the city skyline. The space had been transformed from temporary accommodations into a true home, decorated with artwork I'd chosen for myself, rather than to complement someone else's taste. My phone buzzed with a text from Catherine. Dinner tomorrow? I want to hear how the new medical mogul is settling in. I smiled as I typed back. Yes, but fair warning. I might fall asleep in my soup. Running a medical practice is exhausting. Worth it, though? She responded. I considered the question as I sipped wine on my terrace, watching boats navigate the river below. 3 months ago, I'd been a woman whose life was imploding, whose marriage was built on deception, whose future felt uncertain and frightening. Tonight I was the chief executive of a thriving medical practice, a woman who'd transformed betrayal into empowerment, and someone who was finally living life on her own terms. Absolutely worth it, I replied, meaning every word. The next morning brought a call that would open yet another unexpected chapter in my evolving story. Dr. Stephen Crawford, Chief Executive of Milwaukee Regional Health System, the largest hospital network in southeastern Wisconsin, was requesting a meeting to discuss potential partnership opportunities between our organizations. I'd heard of Dr. Crawford. He was something of a legend in Milwaukee's healthcare community, known for innovative approaches to patient care and strategic business development. His call suggested that Coleman Family Medicine's transformation under my leadership had attracted attention beyond our immediate patient community. We've been impressed by the changes you've implemented at Coleman Family Medicine, Dr. Crawford said when we met at his downtown office the following week. Your approach to integrated care and patient-centered innovation aligns with our strategic priorities. He outlined a partnership proposal that would maintain Coleman Family Medicine's independence while providing access to Milwaukee Regional's resources, specialty referral networks, advanced diagnostic capabilities, and capital for continued expansion. We're not looking to acquire practices, he emphasized. We're looking to partner with exceptional healthcare leaders who share our vision for the future of medicine. As I listened to Dr. Crawford's proposal, I realized that the hostile takeover of Marcus's practice had been just the beginning of my journey in healthcare leadership. The foundation I'd been building over the past 3 months was solid enough to support even bigger ambitions, and more significant impact on patient care in our community. The woman who had orchestrated that dramatic birthday dinner revelation was still part of me, but she was evolving into someone with broader vision and deeper purpose. I was no longer just reclaiming power from a cheating husband. I was building something that would outlast any personal drama and create genuine value for thousands of patients and dozens of healthcare professionals. I'm very interested, I told Dr. Crawford, meaning it completely. Let's talk about how we can make this work. The Milwaukee Regional Health System partnership negotiations were proceeding smoothly when an unexpected call from Rebecca Chen shattered the peaceful momentum I'd been building. It was a Tuesday morning in late July, and I was reviewing patient satisfaction surveys that showed remarkable improvement across all Coleman Family Medicine locations when my attorney's name appeared on my phone screen. "We have a problem," Rebecca said without preamble, her voice carrying the tense professionalism that meant serious legal trouble was brewing. "Marcus is challenging the ownership transfer." I felt my coffee cup pause halfway to my lips. "On what grounds?" "The acquisition was completely legitimate. He's claiming fraud and coercion," Rebecca explained. "Specifically, he's alleging that you used privileged information obtained during your marriage to manipulate minority shareholders into selling their stakes below fair market value." The accusation was both infuriating and strategically clever. Marcus had found the one angle that could potentially undermine the entire foundation of my ownership claim, while painting himself as the victim of a vindictive ex-wife rather than a cheating husband who'd lost his business through his own poor judgment. "How strong is his case?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer from Rebecca's tone. "Weak on the merits, but potentially problematic in court," she replied honestly. "Wisconsin courts don't look favorably on spouses using marital assets or information for personal gain during divorce proceedings. Even though your acquisition was technically legal, a sympathetic judge might view it as ethically questionable." I sank into my office chair, staring out at the parking lot where Coleman Family Medicine employees were arriving for another busy day of patient care. In the months since taking control of the practice, I'd begun to think of these people as my responsibility, these patients as my community. The idea that Marcus could somehow reclaim control and undo everything we'd built felt like a knife twisting in my chest. "What are his demands?" I asked. "He wants to return to his previous ownership position," Rebecca said. "Essentially, he's offering to drop the lawsuit in exchange for you surrendering majority control and accepting a minority partnership role." "Absolutely not," I replied immediately. "This practice is thriving under my leadership. Patient satisfaction is up, staff morale has improved dramatically, and we're expanding services. I'm not handing it back to him so he can run it into the ground again." "Then we need to prepare for a fight," Rebecca warned. "Marcus has hired Kellerman and Associates. They specialize in complex business litigation, and they don't take cases they don't think they can win." The next 2 weeks passed in a haze of depositions, document reviews, and legal strategy sessions that consumed evenings and weekends. I'd been hoping to spend on practice improvements and personal recovery. Marcus's legal team was thorough and aggressive, requesting every email, text message, and financial document related to my acquisition of the minority partnership stakes. More troubling was their strategy of interviewing Coleman Family Medicine employees, ostensibly to understand the practice's operational dynamics, but actually fishing for evidence that I'd used insider information or coercive tactics during the ownership transition. Several staff members approached me with concerns about the questions they'd been asked and the apparent attempt to find fault with my leadership. "They're trying to build a narrative that you're an unqualified outsider who manipulated your way into control," Patricia observed during one of our late evening strategy sessions. "They're hoping to find someone willing to testify that the practice was better under Marcus's leadership." "Are they likely to find that someone?" I asked, though I dreaded the answer. Patricia considered the question carefully. "Most of the clinical staff prefer your collaborative approach to Marcus's autocratic style," she said. "But there are a few people who might be nostalgic for the old days, especially if they feel pressured or intimidated by aggressive questioning." The first major blow came when Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the pediatric division head whose suggestions for mental health services I'd enthusiastically implemented, received a subpoena to testify about her conversations with me regarding practice improvements. "I'm sorry, Sarah," Jennifer said when she came to my office with the legal documents. "I never intended for our discussions about patient needs to become part of a lawsuit." "This isn't your fault," I assured her, though privately I was furious that Marcus was dragging dedicated physicians into our personal conflict. Just tell the truth about what we discussed and when. Our focus on improving patient care speaks for itself. But Marcus's legal strategy became clearer when his attorneys deposed Dr. Robert Kim, the urgent care specialist who had sold me his ownership stake to fund his wife's cancer treatment. They had apparently discovered that I'd known about his wife's diagnosis before approaching him about the partnership sale. Did Mrs. Coleman know about your wife's medical situation when she made her offer to purchase your ownership stake? Marcus's attorney asked during the deposition, which I was permitted to attend. Yes, Dr. Kim replied honestly. She expressed sympathy for our situation and mentioned that liquidating my partnership might help with medical expenses. And did her knowledge of your personal financial stress influence the sale price you were willing to accept? Dr. Kim looked uncomfortable but answered truthfully. Possibly. I needed to sell quickly, and Sarah's offer was fair under the circumstances. I watched the attorney make notes with satisfaction, knowing they'd found what they considered evidence of my exploiting Dr. Kim's vulnerable situation. The fact that I'd paid fair market value for his stake helped arrange transitional healthcare benefits for his wife and ensured his continued employment at the practice seemed irrelevant to their narrative. The depositions continued for 3 weeks, each one chipping away at my confidence and revealing how Marcus's legal team was constructing their case. They painted me as a calculating manipulator who had used my marriage to gather intelligence about the practice's vulnerabilities, then exploited personal tragedies and professional frustrations to acquire ownership stakes at below-market prices. The most devastating blow came when they deposed Elena Vasquez, who had apparently been cooperating with their investigation despite her own ethical problems at the practice. Her testimony, delivered via video conference from her new position at a clinic in Arizona, was damaging in ways I hadn't anticipated. Dr. Coleman expressed concerns to me about his wife's increasing involvement in practice decisions, Elena testified, her composure perfect despite the circumstances. He felt that she was overstepping boundaries and using her consulting background to undermine his authority with staff and partners. Did he ever mention feeling manipulated or controlled by his wife's business expertise? Marcus's attorney prompted. Frequently, Elena replied without hesitation. He said he felt like she was studying the practice like one of her consulting projects, looking for weaknesses to exploit. I wanted to object that Elena's testimony was self-serving and potentially perjured, but Rebecca warned me that challenging a witness's credibility during depositions was premature. We would have our chance to cross-examine her if the case went to trial, but for now her words stood as part of the official record. After Elena's deposition concluded, I sat in Rebecca's conference room feeling more defeated than I had since the night I discovered Marcus's affair. The woman who had helped destroy my marriage was now helping him reclaim the practice I'd worked so hard to rebuild. How bad is this? I asked Rebecca directly. It's not good, she admitted. Elena's testimony creates a narrative that you were planning this takeover long before discovering the affair. Combined with the evidence about your knowledge of Dr. Kim's financial situation and Dr. Foster's family circumstances, they're building a case that you systematically exploited private information to manipulate vulnerable people. But that's not what happened, I protested. I helped Dr. Kim with his wife's medical care. I provided fair value for everyone's partnership stakes. I've improved the practice in every measurable way. I believe you, Rebecca said gently. But trials aren't always about truth. They're about which story the judge finds more compelling. Marcus's team is telling a story about a vindictive wife who used privileged information to steal her husband's life's work. We need a better story. That evening, I sat in my penthouse apartment, staring out at the Milwaukee River while trying to process the possibility that everything I'd built over the past 6 months could be stripped away by legal maneuvering. The irony was bitter. I'd spent so much energy focused on outmaneuvering Marcus professionally that I'd underestimated his capacity for personal retaliation. My phone rang with a call from Dr. Stephen Crawford, whose partnership proposal with Milwaukee Regional Health System was now in jeopardy pending the resolution of the ownership dispute. I'm calling to let you know that our board has decided to pause partnership discussions until your legal situation is resolved, he said, his tone professionally sympathetic but firm. We can't enter into agreements with Coleman Family Medicine while ownership is contested. Another door closing, another opportunity lost to Marcus's legal warfare. I thanked Dr. Crawford for his honesty and hung up, feeling more isolated than I had since the early days of discovering the affair. But as I sat there contemplating the possibility of defeat, something Patricia had said during our strategy session came back to me. Most of the clinical staff prefer your collaborative approach to Marcus's autocratic style. An idea began forming, not a legal strategy, but something more fundamental. Instead of fighting Marcus's narrative about my acquisition tactics, what if I focused on demonstrating the results of my leadership? What if I could show that regardless of how I'd gained control of the practice, the patients, staff, and community were better served under my management? I spent the rest of the evening making phone calls to Dr. Walsh about organizing patient testimonials, to Maria Santos about gathering employee satisfaction data, to Amanda Foster about documenting the practice improvements we'd implemented. If Marcus wanted to make this about who deserved to control Coleman Family Medicine, I was prepared to let the results speak for themselves. The next morning, I called Rebecca with a new strategy. Instead of focusing solely on defending the legality of my ownership acquisition, we would demonstrate that my leadership had been beneficial for everyone involved: patients, employees, and the broader community. That's a high-risk approach, Rebecca warned. You're essentially conceding that the acquisition might have been ethically questionable while arguing that the ends justify the means. Sometimes high-risk approaches are the only ones with high-reward potential, I replied, channeling the strategic thinking that had guided my consulting career. Marcus wants to paint me as a villain who stole his practice. I want to show that I'm a leader who saved it. As I prepared for what would likely be the most important fight of my professional life, I realized that this legal battle represented something larger than a dispute over practice ownership. It was about whether transformation through adversity was possible, whether someone could rebuild their life from betrayal and emerge stronger than before. Marcus had underestimated me once when he thought I would quietly accept his infidelity and public humiliation. Now he was underestimating me again by thinking I would surrender what I'd built without showing everyone exactly why Coleman Family Medicine was better off under my leadership. He was about to learn that some battles are worth fighting, regardless of the personal cost. The courtroom in Milwaukee County was packed on the morning of October 15th, 8 months after the birthday dinner that had transformed my life. Local media had caught wind of the case, a story involving medical practice ownership, marital betrayal, and corporate intrigue was too juicy for the healthcare trade publications to ignore. I sat at the plaintiff's table with Rebecca, watching Marcus and his legal team arrange their exhibits with the confidence of attorneys who believed they had an airtight case. Judge Elizabeth Hawthorne, a no-nonsense jurist with 30 years of experience in business litigation, called the proceedings to order. Over the next 3 days, she would hear testimony that would determine not just the ownership of Coleman Family Medicine, but the future of everything I'd worked to build. Marcus's attorneys opened with the narrative we'd expected: a calculating wife who had used privileged marital information to manipulate vulnerable business partners into selling their ownership stakes below fair market value. They painted me as a woman so consumed with revenge that I'd exploited personal tragedies and professional frustrations to steal my husband's life's work. Dr. Kim's testimony was particularly damaging. Under aggressive questioning, he admitted that my knowledge of his wife's cancer diagnosis had influenced his decision to sell his partnership stake quickly. The fact that I'd paid fair market value seemed secondary to the emotional manipulation Marcus's attorneys suggested had occurred. Mrs. Coleman knew you were under extreme financial and emotional pressure, lead counsel Michael Kellerman pressed. Didn't she use that knowledge to pressure you into a sale you might not otherwise have made? I suppose that's possible, Dr. Kim replied reluctantly, though I could see the discomfort in his eyes about being forced to characterize our transaction in such terms. Elena's video testimony was even more devastating. Appearing composed and professional despite her own ethical lapses, she painted Marcus as a victim of my systematic undermining of his authority and confidence. Dr. Coleman often expressed feeling like he was being studied and evaluated by his wife, Elena testified. He said she approached their marriage like a business consulting project, always looking for ways to optimize or restructure what should have been a partnership. The implication was clear. I had been planning this takeover long before discovering the affair, using my marriage as reconnaissance for a hostile acquisition. When Marcus himself took the stand, he delivered a performance worthy of his medical training. Composed, articulate, and radiating wounded dignity, he spoke about building Coleman Family Medicine from nothing, about his vision for community-centered healthcare, and about the betrayal he felt when he discovered my scheme to steal his practice. "I made mistakes in my personal life," he admitted, appearing genuinely contrite. "The affair with Dr. Vasquez was wrong, and I've taken full responsibility for that. But my personal failings don't justify corporate theft disguised as divorce settlement." By the end of the second day, I was beginning to doubt our chances. Marcus's legal team had constructed a compelling narrative that cast me as a vindictive manipulator who had exploited personal relationships for financial gain. The fact that the practice was thriving under my leadership seemed almost irrelevant compared to the emotional weight of their accusations. But on the third day, our strategy began to unfold. Instead of focusing solely on the legality of my acquisition, Rebecca presented a comprehensive case for why my leadership had benefited everyone involved: patients, employees, and the broader Milwaukee healthcare community. Dr. Patricia Hoffman was our first witness, and her testimony was devastating to Marcus's narrative. Under Dr. Coleman's leadership, the practice had become increasingly dysfunctional, she stated clearly. Communication between departments was poor, staff morale was declining, and several excellent physicians were considering leaving. Sarah's acquisition wasn't corporate theft, it was a rescue mission. Patricia detailed the operational improvements I'd implemented: the telemedicine program that had expanded access for elderly patients, the integrated mental health services that were addressing critical community needs, the enhanced staff compensation and professional development programs that had improved retention and job satisfaction. "The practice is serving more patients more effectively than it ever has," Patricia concluded. "Sometimes change requires disruption, and in this case, that disruption saved Coleman Family Medicine from continued decline." Dr. Jennifer Walsh's testimony was equally powerful. She spoke about the collaborative leadership environment I'd created, the way staff input was now valued and implemented, and the tangible improvements in patient care that had resulted from my management approach. "Dr. Coleman was a skilled physician but a poor manager," she said bluntly. "Sarah brought business expertise that we desperately needed. Under her leadership, we've been able to expand services, improve efficiency, and focus on what we do best: taking care of patients." But the most compelling testimony came from an unexpected source: our patients themselves. Rebecca had arranged for 5 patients to testify about their experiences with Coleman Family Medicine under my leadership. Mrs. Dorothy Peterson, an 82-year-old diabetes patient, spoke about how the telemedicine program had allowed her to receive consistent care despite mobility limitations. "I was missing appointments, and my health was declining," she said. "Now I can see Dr. Walsh from my living room, and my blood sugar is better controlled than it's been in years." James Rodriguez, a construction worker whose 8-year-old son had been struggling with anxiety, testified about the integrated mental health services we'd implemented. "Before, we were on a 6-month waiting list to see a child psychologist," he said. "Now my son gets counseling and medical care in the same building, with doctors who talk to each other. It's changed our family's life." Each patient testimony reinforced the same theme: Coleman Family Medicine was providing better, more comprehensive care under my leadership than it ever had before. The acquisition methods might be questionable, but the results were undeniably positive. The most dramatic moment came when Rebecca called Maria Santos, our front desk coordinator, to testify about staff morale and working conditions. "The old environment was tense and hierarchical," Maria explained. "Dr. Coleman made decisions without consulting anyone, and if you disagreed or suggested improvements, you were made to feel stupid or insubordinate." "And under Mrs. Coleman's leadership?" Rebecca prompted. "It's like working for a completely different organization," Maria replied. "She listens to our ideas, implements suggestions when they make sense, and treats everyone with respect regardless of their position. Staff turnover has dropped to almost zero, and people actually enjoy coming to work." On cross-examination, Marcus's attorneys tried to suggest that Maria had been coached or incentivized to provide favorable testimony, but her genuine emotion and specific examples made it clear she was speaking from personal experience. The final witness was Dr. Stephen Crawford from Milwaukee Regional Health System. Despite the partnership being on hold due to the litigation, he agreed to testify about Coleman Family Medicine's reputation in the broader healthcare community. "In 30 years of healthcare administration, I've rarely seen such dramatic operational improvement in such a short time," Dr. Crawford testified. "Mrs. Coleman has transformed Coleman Family Medicine into a model practice that other organizations want to emulate. The partnership we proposed wasn't charity, it was recognition of excellence. When all testimony concluded, both sides presented closing arguments that crystallized their competing narratives. Marcus's attorneys painted me as a woman so consumed with revenge that I'd stolen my husband's life's work through manipulation and exploitation of vulnerable partners. They argued that allowing the acquisition to stand would encourage similar abusive marital relationships for corporate gain. Rebecca's closing argument was more complex but ultimately more powerful. She acknowledged that my acquisition methods were unconventional and perhaps ethically ambiguous, but argued that the results spoke for themselves. Coleman Family Medicine was serving patients better, employing staff more effectively, and contributing to community health more meaningfully than ever before. This case isn't really about acquisition methods or corporate governance, Rebecca concluded. It's about whether we prioritize procedural purity over practical results. Dr. Coleman wants his practice back not because he can run it better, but because his ego can't accept that someone else, especially his ex-wife, is succeeding where he failed. Judge Hawthorne took 2 weeks to render her decision. When she called us back to court on October 30th, the same media contingent was present, along with several Coleman Family Medicine employees who had been following the proceedings closely. This case presents a classic conflict between legal technicalities and practical outcomes, Judge Hawthorne began. The court must consider not only the methods by which ownership was acquired, but the impact of that acquisition on all stakeholders. She acknowledged that my use of information obtained during marriage was ethically questionable, and that my knowledge of partners' personal circumstances might have influenced the sale negotiations. However, she noted that I had paid fair market value for all ownership stakes, and that no partner had testified to feeling genuinely coerced or defrauded. More significantly, the judge continued, the evidence demonstrates that Coleman Family Medicine is objectively better managed, more financially stable, and more effective in serving patients under Mrs. Coleman's leadership than it was previously. The ruling that followed was more nuanced than either side had expected. Judge Hawthorne upheld my ownership of the practice, finding that while my acquisition methods were questionable, they didn't rise to the level of fraud or criminal coercion. However, she ordered me to pay Marcus additional compensation, essentially a premium for the ownership stakes I'd acquired, to account for what she termed the ethical ambiguity of my methods. The court recognizes that Dr. Coleman built this practice and deserves fair compensation for his life's work, she explained. However, the evidence clearly demonstrates that the practice and its stakeholders are better served under Mrs. Coleman's leadership. Marcus sat motionless as the verdict was read, his attorneys already discussing appeal options in hushed tones. But I could see in his expression that the fight had gone out of him. The testimony about his poor management and the practice's improvement under my leadership had wounded his professional pride more than any financial settlement could. As we filed out of the courtroom, Patricia approached me with tears in her eyes. "We did it," she said simply. "The practice is safe." 6 months later, Coleman Family Medicine completed its partnership with Milwaukee Regional Health System, a deal that provided capital for expansion while maintaining our operational independence. We opened 2 new locations, expanded our telemedicine capabilities, and became a training site for family medicine residents from the Medical College of Wisconsin. Marcus never appealed the judge's decision. Instead, he used his settlement money to start a small urgent care clinic in suburban Madison, focusing on the direct patient care he'd always preferred over business management. We've had no contact since the trial ended, though I occasionally see his name in medical journals publishing research on emergency medicine protocols. Elena Vasquez's prescribing irregularities eventually led to a state medical board investigation and temporary suspension of her license. She's currently practicing in a community health center in rural Arizona, under supervised conditions that monitor her prescribing patterns. As for me, I've discovered that transforming betrayal into empowerment was just the beginning of my journey. Running Coleman Family Medicine has taught me that true leadership isn't about outmaneuvering your opponents, it's about creating value for everyone around you. The woman who orchestrated that dramatic birthday dinner revelation 8 months ago was driven by hurt and anger, focused on reclaiming power from someone who had betrayed her trust. The woman writing this story today is driven by purpose, focused on building something that will outlast any personal drama and create genuine benefit for thousands of patients and hundreds of healthcare professionals. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even, It's becoming someone so successful and fulfilled that the person who hurt you becomes irrelevant to your happiness. And sometimes, the most unexpected gift that betrayal can give you is the chance to discover who you really are when you're not defined by someone else's expectations or limitations. The birthday dinner that was supposed to mark the end of my marriage became the beginning of the most meaningful chapter of my life. And that, more than any legal victory or financial success, is the real transformation worth celebrating. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.